This is Between Hooksets. I'm Jason Walter from In Through the Outdoors with my partner in slime, Kurt Underhill from the fishing crew.
What's going on, buddy?
Yeah. Oh, what a beautiful night. Check this out. Little margarita in my Crappie Chronicle cup right out in the driveway. It was the place where the sun was shining. You know, it was gorgeous. I was in my shorts.
We were out. My wife called me and said, "Is our friends having driveway drinks?"
Ooh.
Because I feel like it's our first driveway drink of the year, so we wouldn't have driveway drinks, and
Good.
so we're on a partial.
That's fantastic. Now, before we get going, I want to remind you, you'll see in the background here too, right there.
Are you a Girl Scout now?
Scout cookies. Girl Scout cookie day. And if I bring it in far enough, gluten-free. So,
are you a Girl Scout now or what?
No, I'm not a Girl Scout. They don't let boys and Girl Scouts. They only let girls and Boy Scouts, for Pete's sake. Come on, get with it, Kurt. You got to figure this stuff out, man. But no, I'm not. I just the Girl Scouts were at the radio station today. We gave away a whole bunch of cookies. I bought a bunch of cookies, and I just want everybody to realize that you've got, I think, until March 24th to get your Girl Scout cookies. And I think the s'mores, this is the last year for them. So there you go.
Them are good.
Now tonight, I want to get to this real quick because we're hijacking the program tonight, and I told Mark about it, didn't get a chance to tell Nick, but he's all right with it. Tonight, we saw this from Wheelchairs and Walleyes. They're talking about a potential Pierre, South Dakota project. So, Jeff Goss, Jennifer Goss, we're going to throw it out there. Could there be one in Pierre, South Dakota? We do have some connections. We may be able to help get the ball rolling. Let's get the ball rolling. So the cool thing here is Wheelchairs and Walleyes are dedicated to making fishing and boating accessible to everyone, regardless of mobility or adaptive needs. So get involved, donate, and participate today. You check them out on their website, and it's very easy to find. If you just Google Wheelchairs and Walleyes, you'll get their deal. You'll see they've got projects in Devil's Lake, and I know it's hard to see because it's just little writing there. And then Hazen, and then Beulah Bay. So if we can maybe get one going in Pierre, South Dakota, let's see what we can do and see if we can help, right?
Yeah, what a great project. We met Jeff at the MPAA, and what a giving family.
Yep.
So
Wow.
we gotta redo their logo. We can't get Lake Chickakawea off there for bringing one to Pierre.
Oh, well, yeah, of course that's going to happen. But at this point, you know, I'm not going to hold that against Jeff and Jennifer or whatever it is. But gosh,
but tonight's going to be fun. I mean, the $1 million talk on what our fisheries are looking like. I've attended the meetings that these guys put on for the last couple of years, and I cannot wait to. You know, I was telling somebody earlier today that I've sat in these meetings and overheard everything that goes on. But tonight's the chance that we get the one-on-one, and we can have the conversation with Mark, and then Nick's on to talk some of Lake Chickakawea, or Lake Francis Case, not Chickakawea, because Mark oversees Wahi and Sharp. So got the Chickakawea thing in my head.
that's all right.
So we'll bring Mark and Nick on. How are we doing tonight, guys?
How's it going, guys?
I'm feeling unprepared now. I don't know
Why?
much about Chickakawea.
Well, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, there's Douglas. There's never mind.
But no, so a reason for tonight, we're getting into ice off, and we talk our uneducated versions of what fish are doing, and we figured what better way to actually have a version of what they actually might be doing than have the senior fish manager for the Upper Missouri River System, Mark Fincel, on, and the communications manager from Game Fish and Parks, who's sat through 10 times more of these meetings than I could ever imagine sitting through. So talk about the river system, what we're looking at, and all the different things. So before we get too much into this, I got one question for Mark. Do you know anything about pressures? Because Chasen is an absolutely huge pressure matters guys. And I'm like, just go fishing, dude.
You know what? Pressure, when you get underneath the water, atmospheric pressure doesn't have that much effect. Okay. So if you do a lot of scuba diving, whether the slight pressures at the surface aren't going to change fish at depth as much as what people think. I think what happens with pressure is that's associated with some kind of front coming through. So you have wind, wave action, stirs up the water, makes muddy shorelines. And so depending on what that front is pushing in, that's where you get either activity or inactivity, depending on how that pressure is changing.
I got to go with that. I've kind of lightened up on the whole pressure thing, because if it wasn't 29.8 to 30.2, I didn't even go. But then I learned during high pressure and super high pressure that I can catch walleye in really shallow water.
Mm-hmm.
So I just go with it. 1 atmosphere, 33 feet. Aha. See, I didn't know that either, and I guess you need to be a biologist or a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist or something to figure it out. I don't know, Nick.
Meteorologist, maybe. I think that
meteorologist
predicts the weather.
Yeah, right. I guess that would probably, but see, I think it's some of the meteorologists who have said, well, now pressure affects fish. And I think that some of those meteorologists who fish, and I'm not talking about Todd Heitkamp. Todd, I'm not talking about you. I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying there are others out there. Like the meteorologists that had us all freaked out a week ago over the big storm we're going to get, with the big whatever bomb thing, and pressure's going to drop 24 millibars in 24 hours.
Well, the important thing you need to know here, Jason, is that it is important that every time you set out on the water that you have your when I don't catch fish plan already preconceived. So pressure makes a very easy topic. I usually blame Kurt's tournaments. That seems to work pretty well for myself. But yeah, so that's just one of those things. It's important to have this is why I didn't catch fish. It's clearly not my fault. It is an act of God, Kurt Underhill, or the fish themselves.
Are you talking about the Gov Cup flip?
I'm talking about everything I do with you, Flip.
Well, I hear you might have a new partner for Cedar Shore, so they may turn around. I mean, no indictment on you, Mason. I'm just saying.
That may turn around. I talked to him.
May turn around. Yeah, you never know. You never know at all. Okay, so let's get to the nitty gritty of it. Mark obviously is well known across the country for his knowledge, because he ended up on the Big Water podcast to talk about the state record walleye and the fact that would it be caught again, and so here's a great place to start. Mark, are we going to see another 18-pound walleye out of Oahe or bigger?
I would say right now is the opportunity. The longer we go, the chances are going to become slimmer and slimmer over time. Yep. So if it's going to happen, it's going to happen here pretty soon, unless we have another big year class of Cisco come through. These big fish are really riding the backs of that, a couple big Cisco year classes. And unfortunately, they haven't had any more banner year classes like that. So the number of these big prey, the big fish eat big prey. So the number of these prey fish are going away.
Yeah, it's a bummer. So again, Kurt, just a second. So are the Cisco important to big walleye because more protein, more fat?
It's just energy. It's more energy in a condensed state, right? They spend less time searching for a Big Mac versus a lot of time searching for chicken nuggets. It's just a big energy pill that they can eat and then digest and find another one. Another great thing is they're not cold water species, but they're kind of a cool water species. And so water temperature affects fish metabolism too. And anytime you can cool them down, metabolism slows down. And instead of burning a lot of energy for metabolic processes, they can retain a lot more of that energy for growth.
So then really a good example of that is minnows in a minnow bucket or in an angle cooler or whatever. You can have minnows in the garage for weeks on end if your garage is cold. 38, 35, 40, 42 degrees. But you put them in the garage when the garage is 70 degrees and they're not going to make it till morning.
Yep.
They're done.
Doesn't matter how much air you pump on them. Yeah, eventually they're
just done.
So so people understand getting into that. there was a big misnomer that after the flood in 2011, you guys introduced Cisco into the system. Like, we're not going to lose the Cisco 100%.
No, so the Cisco were introduced back in the 80s, and they were introduced as exactly what they're doing right now, a larger bodied prey species. But our rainbow smelt numbers are so high for so many years that it actually suppressed the Cisco year classes. And so we've always had a low density number of Cisco out there. And it wasn't until the flood, when all the smelt got flushed, all of a sudden you don't have smelt eating these young Cisco, that Cisco year classes, a few of them popped up, really big year classes. And now these are just holding on from those big year classes.
And I think you told me the reason is because the Cisco actually spawn in the wintertime.
Yeah, late fall into winter. Yep, they'll go up into 3-4 feet of water, spawn, and then the eggs hatch out very early in the spring, probably right about now. And it just matches up perfectly when the smelt spawn, run into shallow water. You have all these tiny little Cisco hatching out at the time when all these rainbow smelt are up there doing their thing. And smelt are voracious. They are cannibalistic, very, very, they're a very predatory species, and they'll wipe out year classes pretty quick.
Wow, that's interesting. So those eggs will overwinter, or whatever they call. They'll lie dormant for an entire winter. Yep. So they spawn in 40 plus degrees, something like that, water, and then when the water reaches that 40 plus degrees again, then boom, yep. Game on. Okay.
So that's the Cisco are actually the primary prey up in Fort Peck, and they link it to ice cover. So any years that you have long drawn out, like early ice and then late ice, that ice actually shields those eggs from wind and wave action, and that's where they produce their big year classes. Now, if they have an open winter, again, these fish aren't spawning deep. If they have an open winter and they drop their eggs, and then you have that wind and wave action, it'll actually kill a lot of the eggs, and you have a very poor year class.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And we're learning so much about honestly the biology of a lake with a Garmin or with live sonar, right? Nick, you probably are noticing things like the fact that 2 weeks ago the water temperature under the ice was 41 degrees, and at that point I'm like, "Oh, we're done. It's over." Now, who the hell would have ever thought that water would be 41 degrees under the ice in March? I think we had you got the greenhouse effect, right? We don't have any snow on the ice, so it's melting. And I keep telling people, ice creates itself from the bottom, right? And it also melts from the bottom. Now we know, and you don't know that. And these vehicles that go through, well, I was on 16 inches of ice 3 days ago. I know it was 75 degrees, but whatever, boom, and they fall through. They don't know that it's melting from the bottom up.
And ice also, similar to humans, does not age very well. So when you look at it, when we get to this time of year, 16 inches is 8 inches, right? So the rule of thumb is you take those and you double it, and you can tell sick ice versus that crystal clear ice. I'll walk out on, I shouldn't say this, but 2.5, 3 inches of crystal clear ice and feel.
Nick, when have you ever walked on ice ever?
I was in college. Yeah, right. Yeah. I fished Jason's lakes for a while, made sure all those were taken care of. No,
right. Well, they were yours. They were yours first. No, I think you and I were fishing them about the same time. We just didn't know each other. But yeah, isn't that interesting? Because we were on 19 inches of good ice on Goldsmith because it's close to home, and we were all just having fun catching saugeye and just playing around. And then the next week we're on 9 to 10 inches of ice. I drilled 9 holes and I started walking to each hole. And you can see this, and I'm like, I'm 220 pounds walking on 10 inches of ice, and it's doing this. Sayonara.
Yep.
I'm out. One vehicle drove out there that Monday when things started. And I'm like, oh man, I'll tell you what, it's got that gray, that dark look. I'm like, oh dude, if you don't fall through, you one lucky dude.
So with that ice underwater temperature, Mark, is there any scientific thing? Because you hear walleye spawn when you get a certain water temperature, a certain amount of sunlight. I go back to my dad's theory. They're women. They go when they're ready.
Pretty much. And it's a combination of both, right? So when you look at peak spawning, peak spawning on the Grand River when we used to spawn in the Grand River was within 4 days every year. So this year, ice will probably be off early. Peak spawn will be April 20th, whatever it is, to April 24th. And it is delayed as you move downstream, right? So it's a combination of both water temperature and sunlight that make them go. Now, if you go over to the east side of the state, they have different spawn timings. The southeast goes a little bit earlier. So it's less linked to sunlight and more linked to water temperature. But it's a combination of both that really make them go.
So, go ahead, Kurt. Go ahead.
Jason was thinking, with that warm water, they're going to go under the ice. And I'm like, no, they're going to go when they're ready. Like, they're just because the water temperature hits 40 degrees doesn't mean they dump their eggs. And I don't know nothing. I'm just going off my dad's mentality. If they're women, they go when they're ready. It doesn't matter. Water temp, it doesn't,
Well, and most people don't understand that there's a gradient there. We always talk about peak spawn as in within a couple days, but you can pick up right females releasing eggs early, and you can pick them up very, very late, like surprisingly late. But again, you're looking for the peaks, not the outliers there. I fully believe here in a couple weeks, somewhere on Oahe, walleye is going to drop its eggs. Yeah.
And Mark, if you could elaborate too, this kind of ties it all together. So you look at Lake Oahe, you look at Lake Sharp, big reservoirs. They've been open. Sharp's been open. We've been out in the boat. Oahe's opening up. Over where Chasen is, they're still on ice. But you compare Goldsmith to Lake Oahe, we're looking at two completely different systems. So I mean, in terms of just how a reservoir progresses through its natural movements, how does that compare towards those natural lakes over in that Brookings, Webster, Watertown area?
Oh, the biggest thing is that rate of warm up as well. So, your eastern lakes are going to warm up much quicker, where something like Oahe or any of the four big reservoirs, that rate of warm up will be a lot less. It's not warming as fast. You don't have the surface temperatures hitting into the 80s with warm days, hot suns like you do, on the east side of the lake. And so not so much just raw temperature of the lake, but how fast is it warming? That's also a cue. And it's multiple. It's a bunch of these cues all together that really get them in the mood, get them ready to go. It's not any one thing.
Yeah.
So okay, so let me ask about the males then. Okay, so the female,
they're ready whenever.
Yeah, the males. I venture to bet if I went up and set a gill net, they'd be releasing milk right now.
Okay.
I mean, you can get them released, and they will be released. They're the first to come to the spawning beds, and they're the last to leave, hands down, no matter what.
And when you look at it from a caloric standpoint, I mean, sperm is cheap. I mean, that's it. It's a completely different factor than those eggs. Sperm is cheap.
Yep.
I mean, I probably shouldn't say that on the podcast, but that might be more than I say all day.
Well, and the males just have more energy reserves to move around, to stay on the spawning grounds, to fast if they need to, versus a female. They have so much. They might be losing 20% of their body mass in one go of it, and they move up onto those spawning. The females move up, from relatively deeper water, move onto their spawning beds, and come off in a very short amount of time.
We got a question here. It says, correct me if I'm wrong, but walleyes only actually spawn at night?
The majority of them do, but not always. Again, like everything else, you have some oddballs. The majority of them spawn crepuscular periods. So sunset, sunrise. That's when most of them are spawning or releasing eggs.
Releasing it. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
So with all that being said, like everybody's always told me Oahe is a fish factory. It makes... like it can provide for the state with the eggs it produces. And is that true? And is that because of the depth? Is that because of the surface area? What makes that is that, yeah.
So there's two different lines of thought there. So fish factory, if we want to look at a true fish factory, it's Lake Sharp. Lake Sharp is a fish factory. It produces 17-inch fish, 17-inch fish, 17-inch fish, and every year class is strong, consistent. One of the most consistent walleye fisheries probably in the nation. We have not seen, at least since I've started here 15, 17 years ago, have not seen a weak year class, right? Oahe is kind of consistent, but you see peaks and valleys. But the difference with Oahe is those peaks are much higher than Lake Sharp. Right. And then your top end of your fish is astronomically higher too, much, much higher as far as length and weight and everything. But if you want to talk fish factory, Sharp is a factory.
Is that because, in your opinion, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, is that because the water's fairly steady levels at all times? I mean, we fluctuate, but not like we fluctuate on Lake Oahe, or what makes it that fish factory?
I would say it's a combination of things. Spawning habitat's one. You got to have a place for those eggs to survive. And then the primary prey for those young fish are gizzard shad. That's the one thing that we've been trying to push into Oahe for a long time, but walleye hatch out before the gizzard shad spawn. And so when the walleye are 2 inches long, they can already start eating larval gizzard shad. And we have pictures of smaller than the fish we stock, small fingerlings with larval gizzard shad in their stomach. They get out and they start going right away. Survival.
Wow.
Very, very high. Versus Oahe, deep, clear, not a lot of food for a young fish in most years. It's a lot harder to survive, right?
But the sharp doesn't grow the fish. I mean, you'll catch a big one now and again, but you're not going to grow what we can grow in Lake Oahe. And
Nope.
what is that, because the gizzard shad's a primary forage and it just doesn't have enough in them to?
That's the nice thing about gizzard shad is it can produce a lot of small, or I don't want to say small, a lot of nice walleye, right?
Eaters.
16 cent, yeah, a lot of eater walleye. But in the fall, all those young gizzard shad die off, and then the ones that don't die grow so fast that they're already too big to be eaten by most of your big walleye. So when you do see big walleye come out of sharp, 99% of the time they're below the dam, and 99% of the time they're eating smelt and Cisco coming through the dam.
So Mark, I know your answer to this one, and I really like your answer. If you had to grow me a state record walleye, what would its diet be based on its size?
So are you talking sky's the limit?
Sky's the limit.
Amount of it? Well, I would stock it into a warm cesspool of a pond with gizzard shad, super productive. Once it left there, I'd put it in Lake Oahe with rainbow smelt to grow it up to that 24-inch range. And then quite honestly, rainbow trout. I would stock the crap out of rainbow trout and let them gorge themselves on rainbow trout.
Okay, so now that's an interesting question. My dad caught a rainbow trout on Oahe. I think it was like 12 pounds. It was a nice one. I have it hanging on the wall of my trailer at Splitlock. But everybody laughs at me. There's no rainbow trout in Oahe. So is there still, or?
Nope. So that comes back from up until the 90s. They used to stock over 2 million salmonids in there, brown trout, rainbow trout, the different salmon, all these things in there. And at the time, smelt numbers were good, and stocking these bigger, when they're smaller, they're prey fish at that time, right? A trout is essentially a large body prey fish for a walleye. Walleye are exceptional predators of salmonids. Look at, the rivers out on the West Coast where there's dang near bounties on walleye because they're so
Did you see
good.
in Canada there is a bounty on walleye?
Yeah,
Right. In Canada,
Yep.
you want to kill, and they'll pay you to kill the walleyes.
Isn't that crazy? Well, they're so effective. They evolved completely isolated, right? So as soon as they come together, essentially rainbow trout have no defense mechanism, and walleye can just eat, just leisurely eat. And rainbow trout are very fatty, a lot of oil, high energy density for the gram for gram. It is literally the best prey fish that you could feed a walleye.
So
Is it because they're dumb too? I mean, they are okay.
Oh,
They're
well,
just
they're not dumb. They're just naive to that type of predator, right? Those systems they evolved in, they didn't have walleye out there until they were introduced, right? And then once they were introduced, holy cow, they did well.
If we're looking at stocking stuff to grow big walleye, what is it the cost? Or we can't maintain a population? What's the stop from putting back rainbows in our system?
It would take some finagling. The biggest thing is cost. You look at Oahe, and if there's a million walleye out there, right? You want to take 10% of them, grow them pretty big. You're going to need a lot of rainbow trout to stock out there, or stock a few of them small and hope that some of them grow and then are consumed by the walleye.
So Mark, sorry.
Randy's got a question here, or a statement maybe. Looking forward to being down at Sharp for the National Walleye Tour with good buddy Tom Goodmestead, Crappie T or Tour Level Tom. which Randy, I watched Tour Level Tom tonight. I loved it. Anyway, he's hopeful to, as ever, to compete, and glad to hear about the area tonight. So yeah, Randy, I don't know where you're from. Tom is from Idaho. So he grew up in the North Dakota area. He's a dentist, and he met Brett Blumendahl, and they kind of got a thing going on there. And it's a really cool story. So he's a dentist that all of a sudden decides he wants to live the life, and do the, the Max Wilson thing or the Dwayne Chelm thing or whatever. So, he's coming to South Dakota to fish the National Walleye Tour, and I believe he's doing the Sharp thing as well. So, okay. So, Randy, you're from Garrison then. Tom grew up in Minot. Okay, I grew up in Rugby. So, sorry, I had to throw that Rugby thing out there, Kirk, but I did.
He always finds a way. But, so, going back to Rainbow, so it's just basically a cost thing. And I know people absolutely hate talking about stocking other species in Oahe than walleye, because they're going to eat. We need walleye, which 100% we need walleye, but there's other things that the walleye can prey on.
Oh yeah. Well, and we just finished up some salmon work, and I mean, the salmon we stock in Oahe, the vast majority of them are eaten by walleye within the first 2 weeks or something like that. Again, it's a pulse of energy to the Whitlocks area where we stock them like you wouldn't believe.
And so, Mark, I mean, just kind of wrap that up, just so we're clear, that kind of went everybody exactly how I thought it was going to, because I knew Mark's answer there. But like, that's why you see Sharp, those fish kind of stop at 20 inches, because they have that gizzard shad, but then there's no big body prey fish for them to convert to. And that's why we've seen these teeners coming out of Oahe is, it's not rainbow trout, but those Cisco, I mean, they were filling that void of, once we got them into the 20s, they had teener food.
Yep. And we do see big fish come out of Sharp too, but 99 times out of 100, they're up in the tail race. And if you open them up, they're eating smelt and Cisco, primarily Cisco.
Oh, Tom, you're going to have a lot of people pissed off.
Hey, in our state, we're good.
I get you. I would love to go to Cascade. Matter of fact, now that I'm getting to know Tom, I've got to go to Cascade. Kurt, we're going to Cascade to do
Perfect. Bullheads grow big fish too?
Walleye bullheads, oh yeah. Oh yeah,
I don't know why they do, because they got the pokey outy things, and frankly, I think I wouldn't be able to swallow. So,
but you put in the trout in the marina and stuff for the stuff like that. They just don't hold for the walleyes to eat on Sharp, or.
So the ones we used to stack in the marina, those are catchable size trout. So those are 16, 17 inches. By that time, you're getting too big, especially.
Gotcha.
You have to have something like Nick said, they top out at 20 inches roughly on Sharp. You need something to get them from 20 inches to 26 inches, right? It's all about the size of the mouth, gape limitation. Putting in 18-inch rainbows isn't going to do anything.
Yeah. So,
yeah, right.
Back to the original question, you were saying our big walleyes are going to kind of dwindle because we don't have the lake herring. And we're talking big walleyes, like the 18 pounders. We're still going to see that 10, 12 pounders, because the gizzard shad or the smelt can carry a fish to that, right?
Yep, 100%. Yeah, we'll have a quality fishery. I mean, the smelt coming back's awesome, right? We'll have a really good fishery. We're just going to lose that highest of the top end over the next 3 years, I'd say. So unless we had another year class. But
so the 17, let's go 16, 17, 18, maybe even nudging 19 or 20, like some felt was going to come out of there. So will these fish, because they don't have the Cisco, they don't have the diet anymore, are they going to start, because they're getting older too, right? I mean, an 18-pound walleye is not young. So are they going to start getting a little smaller, and that's why we're not going to see the next 18-pounder, or
they won't shrink? Yeah, they'll just die. They won't shrink. They'll just they won't have enough energy to meet up with metabolic demand, and eventually they'll perish. And by and large, think of like an old woman too. It's hard to give birth. Spawning is very hard for a big old female. So a lot of them this spring will probably perish trying to dump eggs.
Oh, that's sad. So, so then, really, here again, understanding the biology of the lake, because I think a lot of us don't understand the biology of the lake. You know, I know I don't, and I'd like to understand it more. If we've got a bunch of people out catching a tons of 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s like crazy, it really isn't hurting the system then, because eventually, the way things are now, you know, even if guys are pulling the 17 and 18s out and taking them home and not putting them back, big deal, because they probably aren't going to survive much longer anyway.
Yep, our bread and butter spawners are 20 to 25 inches, I would say. That's where the majority of our eggs come from. If you're getting to that 27, 28 one, they're pretty rare. And two, you never know what the egg quality is going to be and whether they actually survive to pull off a spawn.
Okay, so new regulation on Lake Oahe and other lakes. Any female walleye from 20 to 25 inches must be released. Done. Over.
Man, if you could sex a walleye in end of July, you know, without cutting it open, I'd be impressed.
So okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because this fall it was pretty easy to sex a walleye. So what makes it a little more, what makes it more difficult when they're in good condition, just general maintenance condition? You know, because
post spawn, you know, they just dump their eggs, so the females will have a sunken in belly, easy to tell post spawn female. But then as they start growing back some of those fat reserves, there's a point when they mirror the males very closely, like midsummer. But then eventually in the fall they'll start deepening out and everything. But there's a period of time in there where the females and males look very similar. The only way to tell them apart is you got to flip them over and look at their vent. So like a female will have a different vent than a male, and it's tough to do.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that was kind of my thing this fall. The vent, it was very obvious. I mean, it honestly, when I looked at it, I'm like, oh, there's one hole, two holes. You know, so the vent must elongate. It does something. I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I could tell them apart that easily. So now I'm going to take a peek and pay attention this spring, later this spring, and you know, June and July, and just see what I see.
Well, just look at them, and then like before you flame is perfect time, because you know, even by June, July, you should start seeing some egg development. You know, they'll be tiny, but you'll start being able to tell the difference between eggs and milk.
Yeah, interesting. So that would make sense then, because I asked Kurt, I said, well, how come we just don't have a slot on these female walleye and we put them back? We're not shooting hens, you know, we're not shooting female pheasants. So why would we fillet a female walleye?
Yep. The other hard thing is with regulations, and you know, this is a whole different rabbit hole, but anytime you put a regulation on a lake, you're influencing harvest, right? And that has wide ramifications for all types of stuff. Great example is a 15-inch minimum. You know, people rave about a 15-inch minimum. Well, male and female walleye grow at different rates. So you have a year class, same year class comes up, that female is going to hit 15 inches before the male does. So your harvest is actually going to be geared towards females until those males catch up, right? And so, you know, people don't really think about that, but anytime you put some kind of limit, you're focusing harvest. And in the perfect world, you would have it be equal across the sexes.
So with that
right here, this is the key to understanding a lake, right? I mean, period. When we ask all these questions about minnows and perch and I don't care what haul, it just comes down to good old biology, boys and girls.
So, you know, I've heard you say this. You told me so the 20-inch length minute, you know, the 1/20 is purely a social law. It's because Nick doesn't like the fact that I catch bigger fish than him, which is not true. But, you know, I mean, but there's no science behind that, because we had the Bills on earlier this summer earlier this year. And then Mike Peluso came on and it's like, I see fisheries do better with no slot limit. You know, when you get rid of slot limit, you're going to have a better fishery all the way around.
That's interesting. You brought that up. So me and Paul Bailey, my counterpart in North Dakota, just wrote a paper about that. And with our 1/20 limit here, we actually harvest more of the fish that are caught over 20 inches than they do in North Dakota.
So let's change it.
Well, so like the 1/20, it sets a target, right?
Yeah.
You might fish for a little bit longer until you get your 1/20, versus if you don't have that expectation, you don't have that desire, guys will go out, catch 4 fish, if they catch 4 19.5s, great day, right? If you're at 3 19.5s and there's a 1/20 limit, you're going to keep going until you get your over, right?
Yeah.
Every time. And then another thing, and I hate saying it, is bragging rights, right? Our over.
Yeah,
we got our
We
limit
talk
with
about that
our
all
over.
the time.
Yep.
We got to have
Exactly.
a social media post.
So this is, this was a great case study of how putting on a more protective regulation probably actually hurts or I shouldn't say hurts it. It ends up with more harvest of fish over 20 inches, which is very counterintuitive, but that's the social aspect of fishing regulations. You got to be careful what you do.
I've said it for years, running tournaments. I can probably pick on one hand how many guys that could bring me 4 overs in the Governor's Cup.
Mm-hmm.
I could pick on one hand how many guys could actually do that. And so I'm like, it's not hurting these fisheries. And with you saying these bigger fish are probably spawning and just perishing,
Mm-hmm.
like, why are we not? I mean, if biology, why are we managing out biology? We know how social laws work in our country. Look at the last 4 years. Sorry. But I mean, why aren't we just saying, you know what? We're done with I don't care how your feelings feel, that you can't, Nick's catching 13 inches and Jason's catching 20s. Why I know license sales drives everything, but I've heard guys say, well, I'd come, but it's 1/20, Not that they can even catch more than 1/20, but
I think you're on the right path, Kurt. And one example I have here is after the flood, we actually told the public that a lot of these big fish are going to die. We just lost all our food. A lot of these big fish are going to die. And we actually proposed removing the 1/20 to the commission. But the outcry from the public was such that, they just couldn't do it. And I respect them. They listened to their angling public, but we said, it doesn't make sense to have a 1/20 right now. These fish are 99% of them are going to be gone from the system. Let's just get rid of it. And yeah, the angling public was, very loud and said, don't do it. We like our 1/20.
Yeah. And is that because we're not understanding the biology of the lake? I mean, really, we just don't completely understand it.
It could be, but then it's also, the whole reason that, it's still in effect, especially statewide, and it hasn't been pushed by Game Fish and Parks, is it's a social regulation that limits pig factor, right? When you have a guy at a cleaning station with 4 28-inch fish and a guy that has 1 17-inch fish, there's animosity, there's finger pointing, there's yelling. Again, it's just trying to limit what we call the pig factor. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but
no, yeah, I mean, 100%. I understand that side of it, but if everybody is all about growing fish on Lake Oahe, we're counterintuitive by putting a 1/20 inches on it. I know a couple of years ago at the fisheries meeting, I said, if we say they're going to die, why are we protecting them? Why aren't we protecting the 15 inchers and put a minimum on 15 inchers? Your explanation tonight of the females actually get there faster than the males do. We're kind of, let a fishery do its fishery thing. Now, with that being said, it's gotten better over the years, but people like, oh my God, you killed X amount of walleyes in the Governor's Cup. You're devastating our lake. Is that, what's your scientific biologist factor on, am I hurting the population of Lake Oahe running the Governor's Cup?
Nope, not at all. So, the tagging studies we've done, the multiple tagging studies, everything we've done, the long-term data we have, exploitation is not a limiting factor on Lake Oahe. We just saw the #1 limiting factor in 2011. It was a great example. Come through, wipe out the smelt, and then all of a sudden we have no more fish. Mother Nature, the year classes of prey, the water elevation, that's a big one. You have all these things that really dictate how many fish are in Lake Oahe. Now, we can augment it with stocking, and that's what we're doing. But to get to the big numbers like they saw in the 90s and stuff, I don't even know if we can do that with stocking. That was a lot of fish being produced, but the conditions were perfect for them. Lots of smelt. Water elevation had come up, in the late 90s, flooded that vegetation, made a lot of bait fish, other than smelt even. And it was on fire. 90s were hot. It was
not as many people fishing. We didn't have live sonar. That damn Garmin.
Yeah.
That cheater boxes, whatever.
And these animals, they have natural mortality. They do. These
Right.
fish die. There's fish die every year, and so you have. There's nothing wrong with skimming off the top as long as you're not negatively impacting future production, right? And production is so tied to environmental conditions that you could actually skim a lot of fish out of Lake Oahe without coming anywhere close to affecting reproduction.
So we get a couple comments I want to get to, but I want your opinion. I'll pop them on the screen.
Oh.
But I want your opinion. If you could control the dam on releases, what would your control be? Because I want to see if it's similar to mine.
God.
So yeah, if I had the switch, if I could turn that water on and off, I would drop it down to probably 30 feet lower than it is right now for about 3 years.
And it's at what, almost, is it at 1,600 right now, or is it 1,550?
I can tell you right now, it was $15.99 the other day, but I'll tell you.
That's what I was gonna say. I thought it was almost 1,600.
It's come up about 2 or 3 feet, I think, this winter time. But
Okay.
I would drop it, and again, without taking into account boat ramp closures and all that stuff. If you're looking at just producing fish, drop it all the way down, 1560, 1550 for like 3 years. Let that vegetation grow up, and then in 1 year, boom, put it to 1600. Flood everything, and you're going to have 3 or 4 amazing year classes. You're going to have food for the walleye that are spawning up there, and you're going to get 20 years worth of fantastic walleye fishing.
And Mark, would that be 2008, 2009? That would be a good example of this in kind of modern day time.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, like if we didn't have the smelt crash, that water that came up in 2009, that was the biggest year class we've ever seen on Lake Oahe. 2010, 2011 were also very big year classes. Again, that water came out of the drought 2004 to 2006, 2007, flooded that vegetation. We had huge year classes. We had food out our wazoo. The fishery was just on a trajectory to be amazing.
And that was the double limit years, right?
That came off the end of that. Yeah. So 2001, 2002 were some of those, because at that point, we were coming off the last prey crash in 97. And so building it back up. And then as soon as, and that's a great example too, your 2004, 2005, relatively low abundance of walleye, right? But that low abundance of adult female walleye produced the biggest year class, that 2009 year class we've ever seen on Lake Oahe.
Wow.
And then I remember talking to you right after the flood that 2013, we went to an 8 fish limit because that year class was so big and we had no bait.
Yep. So that was the year that we posed to get rid of the 1/20. We were going to go to, our recommendation for the commission was a 1/20, 8 fish limit, or not a 1/20. I'm sorry. No length limit, 8 fish a day. And then it got changed through the commission process to be 4 fish had to be less than 15 inches, and then 4 fish over 15 inches.
I want to say 2012, the lake kind of held its own, if I remember correctly, from looking at GovCup. 2013, they were filleting walleyes, the bigger ones, and when they hit the meat, it would just bust off like sand. Yeah. I mean, they're garbage. We got to grind them. I mean, they'd cut them open, they'd hit that fillet, and it just like
so
sand.
We were some in 2012, but 2013, 2014 really hit hard. But we were catching walleye that had probably stopped feeding for a year, and they were metabolizing their own flesh. Like you wouldn't have been able to catch them because they were zombies at that point. They were just trying to live as long as they can.
Well,
they were gross.
Before we dive too much more, I better get back to some of these comments. Chad wants to know, can you explain why a cask area seems to draw big walleyes? The fish actually travel the system. I personally think the big walleyes are everywhere in the lake. What's your thoughts, Mark?
I mean, there's definitely concentrations of big fish, and essentially Whitlocks to a casket right now is holding a lot of big fish, but that's also where the majority of our Cisco are hanging out too. We do have Cisco all the way down to the dam, but the big areas of high density Cisco are right that Whitlock Swan Creek area.
And that's evidenced by the bait balls we see.
So Scott,
oh, good.
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just saying, a lot of the bait balls, it depends what size bait they are, but it could be smelt too. So smelt do, go up that far especially with our water elevations. So it could be Cisco or smelt, but
Okay.
those big fish hanging out there. Now, that being said, there are big fish on the lower end too. Definitely,
Yeah.
you look at historically Peoria Flats is big fish, central, right? And there's still big fish down here, but fish follow the food, and there's a lot of food right now in that Whitlocks to Swan Creek area.
Well, Mark, I know you got to see a big one from this winter. I happened to weigh it the night before you got to see it, and that was on the southern end of the lake and tied the state record for spearing.
Close. Yeah.
It was within an ounce, man. It was really close.
Well, I'll tell you, when I weighed it weighed 14.99.
Well, we can't round up. So
Yeah,
in
no,
our
it
rules,
was 14. It was 14.99 on my scale.
Oh, was it? Okay.
And then I look at the picture. It was 14 because I flipped it to ounces, so I could look at both, and it came in at 15.6.
Yep. And it needed to be,
6. Yeah,
15.
It needed to be 15.
It needed to be 15 on the dot. And we always round down. That's at our record books. At anything over is always rounded down. So I was like, man, just a little bit more. You would have brought this in last night, maybe.
Kurt, how much blood loss had there been in that fish?
Well, from the guy telling me, he said he didn't want. I'm not going to bring up his name. He had his kids with. He did not want to throw the spear at it. The kids freaked out. He threw the spear at it. He tried to knock it off spear because he hit it in the tail. Thought it would live, and then he goes, "I got it," and I put it in the backseat of my pickup. And it looked like Compton's crime scene. It was blood everywhere. He's like, it wouldn't have lived, so I'm glad I took it in. But he's like, it was blood everywhere. He goes, if I'd probably gotten in, because I probably waited 2.5, 3 hours after, because I was at a meeting. I probably waited a couple hours after he actually speared it. So at time of spearing, it probably was a state record.
Well, I looked at it too, and when he pulled that spear out, you'd see a chunk of flesh about that could have been the difference.
Yep. Well, and you, Kurt, you said too that he didn't take it direct.
No, he threw it at an angle.
Yep.
He took it at an angle, hoping to miss it because he didn't want to. He didn't want to kill it. But you got to do what the kids want, right? So
before, Scott, we'll get back to your pike situation because I want to talk about that. Tom has a question. I'm guessing more for Lake Sharp. Because he's coming to fish the Sharp NWT and the Sharp Showdown. How long are the gizzard shad inches wise? I'm guessing, Tom, correct me if you are asking anywhere, but I'm guessing Lake Sharp.
Well, I mean, that depends if it's an adult or age 0, right? So our adults, world record gizzard shad was actually caught at a Lake Oahe. They get to be easily 5 pounds. So, when you talk about an adult, they're big fish. When we move our pre-spawn adults up to Oahe to spawn, we average 2.5 pounds for each one. So these are big fish. The young ones, it really depends on the time of year you're up here. So they'll start spawning. They're more tied to water temperature. So on Lake Sharp, for instance, we target them during the spawn, and usually that's beginning of mid-May, maybe beginning of May. It's really, they're more dependent on water temperature than sunlight.
But that's like you got to be on it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they turn on and turn off right away. Well, and that's partly because it's temperature driven, right? As soon as that water temp hits 62 degrees or whatever they need to spawn, boom, time to go. And then it'll be done in 3 days. You go back out there 3 days later and gone.
So why can't you take them prior to that hot number? Or because they're just not catch.
Can't catch them. So when we're moving them for the trap and transfer, that's when they're actively spawning. They're in shallow water. We can electrofish them. That way we're not killing them with like gill nets or something like that. And so our window to move them is literally 4 or 5 days max. But get back to the size, they spawn, they hatch out. And so by the end of June, they could be an inch and a half long. Really depends on when they spawn. The earlier they spawn, the bigger they'd be. And then they just keep growing throughout the fall. And, I've seen them age 0s in the fall, almost 6-7 inches. By that time, they grow really fast.
Ooh, good walleye food.
Yeah. But the nice thing about shad, though, too, is they keep spawning through the summertime. As long as that water temperature stays above, 62, 65 degrees, they'll have a peak spawn, and then they'll just keep cranking out eggs throughout the summer until the spawn's over. That's why In the fall, if you run like we do some seining for some of our near shore prey fish stuff, you'll get, again, the 5-6 inch shad, but then you'll also get 2-inch shad. And those are just ones that were spawned so much later. That's why it's a great, again, shad are just amazing for walleye because they keep pumping out these little prey for the walleye, the young walleye.
So all the year class of walleye have something to eat on.
Exactly.
So that's
the big ones. The big ones are kind of out of luck. Up to about 18, 19-inch walleye will take advantage of those shad, but after that, they just don't get big enough for the bigger walleye.
So is there a point we ever have to worry about overpopulation? I know wahi, they're going to die off because they can't survive the cold water. Was there ever a chance on sharp we have to worry about too many big? Obviously, they keep going, but are we going to get a nuisance? Because what is it, south of pretty much Nebraska? They consider them a nuisance fish?
Yep, roten on them. They hate them. I am more worried about our shad leaving the system in sharp than becoming a nuisance. So the winters here, there's a handful of areas on Lake Sharp that have some artesian wells, warm springs, great examples right out from Cattleman's. So in Hippo Lake, right out from Cattleman's is an area, it looks like a pool-sized area right out in the middle of Hippo Lake, and it's the last place to freeze and the first place to open up. Well, there's actually some artesian warm water springs there, and that's where vast majority of our adult shad go that survive the wintertime. Any shad caught out in the open, probably going to die. Doesn't matter the size, right? But Lake Sharp just has a couple of these locations that keep shad, just stay warm enough, long enough to keep some of those adult shad surviving year after year.
So I was talking to Nate Zielinski from Colorado, and he was saying they have some cold water shad up there. Is that such a thing? Like, is there a cold water shad species? Because they said the mountain lakes have shad in them.
I've never heard of it, but I'm not going to say they don't exist. I know we have talked about bringing up shad from some of our southern counterparts, Kansas, Oklahoma, stuff like that. And there is some legitimate fear that, those fish haven't spent the last 20 generations up here. And so what their cold tolerance is, are we moving the needle on the cold tolerance of these shad, from generations and generations actually living up here. As far as a truly cold tolerant shad, I haven't heard of it, but then again, they could be out there.
But to that point too, Kurt, I mean, those lakes could have a similar situation. If there's warm water sources somewhere within that watershed, within that water body, they could find a way that they could survive even those coldest winters.
Yep.
So I've heard of rumors of, from back in the day, some artesian wells in the back of Okoboji. Do we see the fish, the shad congregating there? Is that keeping some shad alive or no?
Well, most of the springs I know in Okobojo Bay, they come out of the hillside. And so by the time that water trickles down, to the lake, it's been exposed to 3 weeks ago is -20, right? So, as far as being a significant input of warm water, probably isn't enough there.
Okay.
The others are underground then. So we're seeing that warm water rise up.
Yep, they were uncapped warm water wells before the reservoir was built. And so when the reservoir came up, now they're just pumping, based on pressure, just pumping out warm water into the lake.
So we just need to talk Trump and that the warm water matters, and drill baby drill on Lake Hawaii for some artesian wells.
That's another, Nick brought up the thing. That's another thing I've been pushing for a long time, is to literally drill warm water wells in the back of these bays. Another great idea is put a power plant on the lake somewhere, and use that
discharge some hot water.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Hey, I'm all in for all these ideas. I like this stuff, and then keep these fish healthy. And I mean, we got a great system. I mean, Lake Oahe, in your opinion, Mark, we're looking, other than a catastrophic failure or another 2011.
Yeah,
our system is projecting out to be a great fishery for the years to come.
Yep, I think we're on a really good path right now. The slow increase of rainbow smelt, it's not a bad thing that it's been slow, but it's consistent every year, just building and building. And now we're at a critical mass now that we have really good smelt in the system. I'd like to see more shad. I don't know what this winter did. If we did have any overwinter survival, I doubt it. But and then the Cisco, yeah, we still have Cisco in the system. And as far as numbers of walleyes, they're going up too. So
before we jump off Lake Oahe, I was going to ask this question tonight. Now, I've sat through the meetings, and the walleye or the pike situation is always so minuscule. Is that common, or are we seeing a downturn in our northern pike?
Yeah, I mean, pike need flooded vegetation to reproduce, right? So anytime you get into a high water period where you're flooding vegetation, you see, a lot of small pike produced. Well, we haven't had flooded vegetation in, quite a while, 2012, 2013, when that lake started coming down after 2011. So what pike that are out there are probably pretty big. We haven't seen a lot of young ones. So, what we see is what we get. The big ones that we see this spring when we're dunking a smelt, that's probably what's out there. There's not a lot of young ones following them up. Now, there'll always be pike in there, don't get me wrong, but as far as numbers, numbers are definitely going down right now.
And Mark, that goes kind of the same way as the yellow perch and the crappie as well. Right? I mean, when you look up in
100%.
Mulbridge, the Moreau, Grand, I mean, that's going to be how these, warm water vegetation driven fish are going to fluctuate.
Now, the interesting there is, we have seen a resurgence of yellow perch, believe it or not, and we've seen it both on Oahe and on Sharp. And I think they're actually spawning, hanging their skeins on submerged trees, right? So the water elevation has come down and made the trees at a certain elevation under the water that the perch are actually taking advantage of those sunken, the big trees, the big cottonwoods and stuff, and they're starting to spawn on those. Yeah, they're in the same boat. If we didn't have those cottonwoods that they're using right now, if we were just reliant on submerged vegetation, we wouldn't see the perch that we're seeing right now.
Well, I sure do miss the tire reefs or whatever they were called on Oahe, because boy, was crappie fishing fun then.
Oh, the 2009 year class. Again, we talk about that water coming up. The 2009 crappie year class was, again, the biggest.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And we harvested those for 7 years after that. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and I've heard of guys in October on the right years, you go into the Cheyenne and hit every point, and it's just jumbo crappie after jumbo crappie after jumbo crappie.
Amazing. Yeah.
And I've seen some dinner plates come out of the system.
Yep.
And as of a couple of years ago, it happens. But he goes, it's not every year. It's just a random occurrence. So, and that's when he
gave up some really nice perch this year too. Big perch.
Mm-hmm. But that's where I say, take advantage of them. I tell everybody, if you're onto a big slab crappie bite on Lake Oahe, pull them out, because you don't know, they're not needed to reproduce. They're probably going to die in the next couple years. Take them out, because take advantage of them. They won't be there a couple years.
I think we need to understand the biology of perch a little better too, because they have such a short lifespan, right? And they do spawn differently.
They do, and it depends on where you're at. So generally, the perch that grow fast, that they grow fast, live short lives, and don't attain a super large size. But then you have, a different, I don't even know what you would call it, a different lifestyle where you grow slow, you live longer, and then you reach truly the jumbo sizes. So it's a little bit different than walleye. With perch, we're actually looking for moderate growth, not fast growth, but moderate growth, because with perch, the faster you grow, the faster you're going to die.
So that must have been the situation on Marsh then, right?
You say what?
That must have been the situation on Marsh by Hayti then, with that was astronomical, the 12 to 16 inch perch that came out of that thing a couple years ago.
It could have been. I guess I'm unfamiliar with it, but yeah, again, if you grow fast, especially with perch, you're going to die young. Yep, grow fast, die young.
So Shane's got a question. I know we talked about this at the fisheries meeting. Any concern with Hippo Lake turning into an oxbow in the future and cutting off the springs for the smelt access?
Yep.
And you touched that at the fisheries meeting, and you want to go in more to that.
That's one of our biggest concerns here in the office, right? So Shad is driving Lake Sharp, right? The factory of South Dakota. With the flood, after the flood, it silted in a bunch of the backwater areas. The connection from the main lake to Hippo Lake has really, decreased over the last few years. Even after the flood, it's getting shallower and shallower and shallower. And again, these fish are what fuel Lake Sharp. There's a couple other areas that have warm water inputs that we know of, and there might be some that we don't know of. Great example is Capitol Lake, right? That warm water coming out of Capitol Lake, running down Capitol Creek. We know some shad do overwinter there, but by and large, Hippo Lake is immensely important to our shad population.
So is there any thoughts on digging that out or dredging or anything like that?
Oh, there's definitely thoughts, and there's, I definitely push it whenever I can for, for the powers that be. I think it's immensely important, but you want to talk about dollars. Holy cow, is that
big bucks?
Millions. Yeah, millions.
Another thing is, if they ever bring up to Capitol Lake, well, us sportsmen got to fight against it.
I would, yeah.
Let's not cap that well.
Yep. There were some concerns here when they were talking about capping it, and we're like, man, we know it's not a major overwinter area like Hippo Lake is, but it's still pretty important, especially for upper sharp.
Yeah. So we're getting to the hour mark. What about Lake Francis case? I know we talked to the meeting, Mark. This is kind of out of your wheelhouse a little bit because you stick up higher, but everybody's like, the fishing sucks, but your nets are showing good down there. And that we're starting there here in 3 weeks or a month from now. We'll be on Lake Francis case for Cedar Shores. What's that looking like? What's the story behind that lake?
Go ahead, Nick, I know you're looking to jump in here.
I was going to say, you want me to take that one? I'll bat for Lon Henry here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Kurt, you hit the nail on the head. This was probably the number one thing we heard about this last year is Lake Francis case had some pretty tough fishing. Well, I'm going to look to Mark here a little bit as the much smarter version of me. But when you look at what Lake Francis case had last year, like you referenced, when you look at our nets, yeah, the abundance is down a little bit, but there's still, like 58% of the fish in the system were 15 inches or larger. There were plenty of fish for us to go out and target as anglers. Now we look at those gizzard shad, again, Lake Francis case, very similar to Lake Sharp, it's gizzard shad driven. Well, we had a very mild winter last year. Guess what that meant? A lot of those shad survived. When a lot of those shad survived, right, we think about Chamberlain bite right now. Chamberlain bite's always awesome because your jig and minnow is about all they can see. If it's either your flicker shad or it's your jig and minnow. Well, that wasn't the case this past year. So even, come that Platte Chamber tournament, that May into that June, they already had food sources that were existing. Couple that with those shad doing what shad do really well, and that's reproduce. There was a ton of food in the system, and we didn't get too sciencey tonight, which I'm really proud of us for. So I'll change that trend right now. But you look at the relative weights, the WRs, we were looking at record numbers. We were looking in the low 90s, whereas, a Lake Sharp fish and more what you see for Lake Francis case similarly is in the 80s to 90s. So when you're looking at really high relative weights, what that means is, yeah, there are fish in the system, but there was a ton of food for them. Well, that means they don't have to eat as much. And likewise, when you throw that jig and minnow, when you throw that flickered shad, it's not against, a handful of shad here and there. It's against a whole mass of bait. So I think it ended up being one of those situations that there is plenty of fish for anglers to catch, but those fish did not have a need to bite. And that's what I enjoy about fishing is, if I go deer hunting, I don't really care what that buck's doing, right? If it's in front of me, he's going to have a bad day or I'm going to miss, one of the two. But I'm counting on fish to bite. Even I can be on fish. If they don't bite, I don't catch them. So I think that's kind of the big story. And man, when you hear those reports from Chamberlain right now, they are really, really good when they're pumping water, and they're nice fish. So I think that's kind of early returns. That's kind of what I'm feeling. So I got relative weight in there. I got abundance. I'll drop a fecundity in there for gizzard shad. So now we're biology. So
with that, was this winter considered a hard winter, a normal winter, or an easy winter? I mean, in my mind, we're in March and we're looking at possibly, pike fishing. I saw Bill Wackerly caught a pike up in a casket today off the shore. So, I mean, we're March 12th and we're pike fishing.
It depends what fish you're talking about, what species. So this year for a Cisco, probably not a real great winter. Ice up was late. Ice off is going to be early. Not a great winter. As far as like pike and perch, again, the water hasn't coming up. no, as far as we can tell, the water's not going to come up drastically this spring, with snowpack and
Yep.
prairie snow melt and stuff like that. So, for some species, it was a hard winter. For other species, it's mediocre. Average winter, I would say, for like walleye, rainbow smelt, stuff like that. As far as shad, I couldn't tell you. I would say that this winter was hard enough on Oahe that we probably lost our year classes of shad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know. It was just
Yeah,
unfortunate.
that's a bummer. By the way, I'm running the wheels to walleyes, wheelchairs to walleyes. Hint at let's get the project going on pure thing here. I'm just going to let it roll a little bit. I see we're like about an hour, 5 minutes, which is great. Honestly, we could go for another hour or two, but we really hung our hats tonight on the center part of the state, which is great. We needed to talk about Sharp and Oahe and Francis Case. And I think maybe some of our viewers and some of the people that follow us would love to have you come back and then talk about Thompson, Ponset, 81 Ponds, probably.
Probably have to get a different guy than Mark for that one.
Yeah, I fished those when I went to school, but they're kind of out of my wheelhouse nowadays.
So before we jump off, the invasive species, the ugly word, is that affecting Francis Case, Sharp? I know we had 2 last year in Oahe and none this year, correct?
We had 3 in 2023. We caught 3 adults in 2023, or found 3 adults. 2024, we found 1 adult. Pretty much same areas, all down on the lower end of Lake Oahe. So
what if we save somebody $100? How do we do that?
I was curious.
Remember last week we were talking about blade baits?
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. You didn't have to go out and spend a bunch of money.
But so what are we seeing on, is that, the Great Lakes have obviously, Lake Erie has zebra mussels and the walleyes are still big. Do we, other than, pumps, water, all that different things, are we concerned as a biologist standpoint on gizzard shad on our system? I mean, obviously public, we're concerned. We don't want shards of glass on the beach, but is that going to negatively affect our fish?
So, if you use different case studies, you brought up Erie, great example of zebra mussels got in and Erie's pumping, right? It's doing really, really well. There's other lakes that have seen the exact same thing. And then there's other lakes that zebra mussels get in, and then you see walleye populations decreasing. All I can tell you is that we got zebra mussels back in 2017, I think it was. And like the last 2 years and this is Lake Sharp, the last 2 years on Lake Sharp, we've had 2 of the highest abundance year class, gillnet catches we've had today. Abundance has been the highest over the last 2 years. If you add in 3 years ago, it's 3 of the highest 4 since that time. So to me, it looks like we have zebra mussels in there. Good year classes are still being spit out every single year. Fish condition hasn't changed at all. The one thing I have seen is the water clarity issue. And so I think anglers, and I think they're starting to adapt to it too, they have to change presentation. They have to change location, when and where to fish, because the days of going out and fishing 10 feet of water, middle of the day, sun overhead, no wind, those days I think are going to be few and far between going forward. Now, the fish are still there. They're still eating. They're still reproducing, everything like that. But how you fish for them, I think, is going to have to change a little bit on Lake Sharp as, again, that water clarity becomes an issue. Yeah, becomes an issue.
Right.
And Kurt, I'll add too, as we kind of talk Lake Francis Case as well, that is probably something that attributed to last year as well. Yeah. I'll go back to even what we talked about with 2011. The 2011, you saw the smelt get flushed through the system, but everything, these are complex systems. That led to the Cisco taking off. That led to, other chains of events that take place. So we look at the zebra mussels in Francis Case, as Mark just said, clears up the water. That changes how we fish, but that also changes, and this is what they're seeing down there on Francis Case. Vegetation can now grow at deeper depths. Well, we know South Dakota, the wind blows, and it especially blows when Kurt has a tournament. I try to get that jab in as much as possible. But when that vegetation can grow to deeper depths, it's going to be less impacted by that wave action. It's going to be able to stay more. So like Mark just said, fish are going to be in different areas. Fish are going to act differently. How we target them is going to be different. And I think that's just one of the changes that anglers down on Lake Francis Case are experiencing. That deep timber out there, those walleyes are probably sitting out there a bit longer than they were, more what we're used to on, seeing in Whitlock's upper end of Oahe. I think there's also vegetation now that's growing, weedy vegetation that's growing shallower, and that's probably holding some fish as well. It's holding forage. They don't have to eat as much. It's concentrating them in areas that, Two Johns, Red Rocks, all those areas that we were used to just going to Platte and fishing and catching fish no matter what we did. That's kind of changing it. And I think that's just one of those things. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying when you put something in a complex system, it's not just one thing that changes. It's the whole dynamics of the system.
That's something I'll echo with Nick too, with the zebra mussels clearing up the water. The vegetation change, is noticeable, right? You're seeing vegetation go much deeper than you ever used to. And fish use it. And, the vegetation is actually really good for producing fish. It's a good structure to, for bait fish and even juvenile sport fish to, orient to. So it's not a bad thing as far as fish production, but it changes how you're going to have to approach those fish. Presentation is going to have to change.
And I want to clear it up right now. We're promoting clean, drain, and dry.
Yeah.
Do not spread. Stop, slow the spread. Like I just was asking the question in theory, like if people think that the zebra mussels are going to choke out our fish, that's, not the theory, that we don't know, but we don't see that happening possibly.
I was going to say, we don't have the data right now to support that. That being said, these are very different systems than, say, the Northeast, the Southeast, different areas. Go out west, Ormond and Angostura, and very different systems. So what we're seeing here on the reservoirs is, I would say, kind of unique, right? I don't know how they're going to impact those lakes up in the Northeast.
And I've heard, the Great Lakes case too, Kurt, but that's the same type of situation. Is every system is different and every system's going to react differently. It's the same as human beings is kind of how I think about it. You can give us all the same diet, same workout regime. We're all still going to look different because we're all still different human beings.
Yep.
All I got to say is do not bring gobies in. Anybody who tells you to bring gobies in, do not do it. I've heard that argument. Let's just bring gobies in. No, we do not want gobies.
It'll just become the Great Lakes.
There is nothing wrong with the status quo. Let's just not bring anything in. Let's just take care of ourselves and we'll be all right.
I like that answer. And hey guys, we hit an hour and 12 minutes here. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's tonight was about what's going on, and I think a lot of people got a clarity of what is going on in our system. We got a great outlook for probably all three reservoirs in your guys' opinion. And, who knows? I mean, we never thought 2011 was going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but let's knock on wood and,
Four reservoirs, Kurt. I would say 4 reservoirs because Lewis and Clark, that walleye and sauger abundance is looking very good as well. So, that's kind of our unsung hero here. But when you look, they didn't stock any fish, and they have their highest age 0 year class coming through that system right now. So I would not forget about I'm not going to let us forget about our Nebraska friends down there too, Kurt. That will not happen on my watch.
Good deal. Stephen Scott, thank you. Hey, one thing here real quick before we go, we're probably going to have you guys come back anyway, because I think we're staring drought in the face. I will, when I go out this weekend, Nick, I'll take pictures, and you will absolutely crap your pants, literally, because there are road beds that have been sunken for years that I don't think you knew were even there unless you were looking at maps. Sinai, the road behind Reinhardt's there, that thing is out of the water, period. And some of the road beds along the 81 systems are coming out of the water, and we need rain bad. We need moisture bad. And the color of the lakes, East 81 has this butterscotch look to it, and it's scary. I don't get it. And then on the other side, it's a milky grayish green. So lots to talk about there on the east side. And Uncle Lou.
Thanks, Uncle Lou.
There you got it. All right.
Can I say something real quick on that?
Yes.
That
Yes.
drought thing. So the one thing that's different for the Missouri River reservoirs, when we go into a drought, local regional drought, that's when we actually see more water coming out of the reservoirs because they have to hit navigation, certain flows downstream. So if we have these rivers pumping into the Missouri River that are all in drought stage, that means higher discharges from the Missouri River. So just be cautious. If anybody's planning on coming out here, check beforehand for boat ramps, because we're at kind of a critical threshold where if we do go down much lower, which we probably will based on the drought, some ramps are likely going to be out of service, and the parks guys are really good about trying to get, you know, ramps back into service. But make sure to check, because this is shaping up to be a water loss year. You know, water elevation is probably going to drop pretty good.
Which, like you said earlier, drop it 30 feet, let it stay down for a few years. But with that being said, like Nick, maybe you know, like Spring Creek is, as far as I've been told, is the longest ramp on the system.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, that's going to have to go. I've got pictures. I wish if we'd known we're talking this, I could have showed you pictures from 2003, that era of driving all the way down the boat ramp, off it, and, you know, dumping boats in from Governor's Cup photos from them eras.
And then walking 20 flights up to get to your parking. Oh,
yeah,
my God.
that's when Nick drives the boat and has someone else backing down.
I mean, Mark, I kid you not, like a couple of years ago when everybody was complaining about how low the water was on Lake Oahe, I have pictures I went and took of the same spot I had pictures from before. And instead of turning out top of the ramp, the guys were driving all the way to the bottom.
Yep.
And like, you can't even see the restaurant on the hill. So where the gas dock is, like the water isn't even to the peninsula there. That's how low it was in those eras. And I'm like, you guys, my dad's like, you know, guys don't realize you have to back around a tree at Spring Creek behind the boat ramp when the water gets low. Yep. And we kind of saw the top of that tree that year, but I mean, Shane was on tonight. Shane can probably go back to those eras where you drove off the concrete onto the silt to put your boat in.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, that's a good ramp. There's a couple of them. Swan has a good ramp too, a low water ramp. But you know, your Chantiers, a bunch of ramps.
Flats.
Yeah, I was going to say, just make sure to look. I think Garrigan's is already out, but for anybody traveling, make sure to check it out first, especially when you get into that June, July period.
And we have an awesome map, our public fishing access map, gfp.st.gov, that has all those ramps. And the nice thing about that too is that will say the main ramp, but also the low water ramp. And that's one thing that, like you said, Kurt, this isn't new for us here. We have a pretty good low water ramp infrastructure that you never know what they're going to look like until they come out, right? But we've got pretty dang good tools that folks can go and they can see, all right, this ramp's in, this ramp's not. If I want to fish in this area, this is my best option. I mean, check out that public fishing access map. Even the last 2 years, we've made some really good improvements for shore anglers, ice anglers, urban fisheries. Wherever you're fishing in South Dakota, give it a check out on any normal year, and you're gonna have a really good tool at your disposal.
And I'll say, you know, look at a couple years ago, Bush's. You know, that one came out of the water and the Parks Department jumped on it, knocked down, or basically, I mean, it's not perfect, but you made it happen in, you know, the days. Yeah. Shane's got a comment. How about the low water ramp at West Shore? You had to drive to the end of the current ramp, hang a left, then back down.
Yep. Yeah,
so,
that's a weird one. Yeah.
We've seen the water low. It's nothing new. We know one thing, low water, vegetation grows. I mean, if you guys could somehow like replant trees on Sully and Peoria Flats, would be amazing. Like, let's just air seed it or something. Let's put some willows out there. You know, I mean, that would help our fishery tremendously. So low water isn't bad. I get all the time. What's the water look like? Well, recreational, it sucks. Mm-hmm. And you're sorry you can't miss Sully Flats by, you know, you have to worry about missing Sully Flats by 10 feet instead of missing it by, you know, where you could drive across it before. You got to be concerned on what you do, but it's good for the system.
Yep.
High water is not.
Fluctuation is good for the system.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
right.
that's true over by you too, Jason. I mean, that's where these yellow perch come from. You get 2 or 3 dry years, You let those weeds grow, and then you flood those babies, and guess what? 2-3 years later, there is a lot of perch there.
Yeah.
Well, the only part of fluctuation I'm a little concerned about this year is that if we have to use the old ramp on Sinai, water's down a lot. We'll see. We'll see. I don't. Mother Nature may give us plenty of rain and snow. I don't know, but fellas, it's been great. This has been a lot of a ton of information, and I learned a lot, and I think we all learn a lot when we understand the biology a little bit better. That's fantastic. So thank you very much. We're going to have you back again because we got to talk Eastern South Dakota, no doubt.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. All right. Take care.